Come on through, Rudo.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome to the UC MBA and Executive Education Masterclass series. Today we have the privilege of talking to Rudo Tagwireyi. She is the CISO of UC. She's also the Director of Connectivity and Digital Risk. She won the Next CIO award last year, and she's also a UC MBA student. Thank you so much for joining us, Rudo. It's so lovely to have you.
Thank you, Samari, for having me. I just enjoy being here. And yes, the UC MBA is an awesome program.
So, Rudo, tell us about the latest developments in cybersecurity.
So I can't actually talk about the latest development in cybersecurity without talking about the basic key fundamental things that we should do in cybersecurity. So I would say we still need to continue doing all the good things that are quite basic, like patching, making sure that, we've got MFA set up for our users, even for your personal accounts as well, making sure you're not just looking for free software, because we all love free things, right? But there's nothing for free. And just understanding the basic hygiene about phishing emails. So I think there are those fundamental things that we need to just make sure we're good at. But what we have seen in the sector right now is with the emergence of AI, the rate of threats or that velocity is actually increasing. It used to take a couple of days, 5 weeks, a week for an attack to happen. Now, if there's an exploit in the wild, it can take 1 hour for an attack to actually happen. So it really tells us that we actually have to use a different approach, right? So instead of us focusing on our defenses, because we can defend all we want, but to be honest, it's really expensive to be able to build a fortress for cyber, right? The investment that you need to make, I don't think it's sustainable for any business unless if you're a Fortune 500, but if you're a university like us, it's not sustainable. So I think shifting how we look at cybersecurity and actually acknowledging that, yes, we might be breached, but we are doing all those good foundational things that I've spoken about. But then we are shifting to the right and we're saying we are ready to be able to respond and recover if we get breached.
So, of course, building defenses is still something that you do, but actually just increasing your scope of responsibility to that respond mandate, right? So what does that look like then in terms of setting up your team, getting the organization ready? What does that look like?
So we from a cyber perspective, we have always had the respond and recover function as one of the things that we do, and that's mainly we have our security operations team that's actually doing the detection so that they can easily respond if there is an incident. So we've got the incident response playbooks that we utilize to be able to do those response functions. But I think what is really critical is that integration with the business, understanding the impact of any event to how the business operates. So if we understand that impact and making sure that our businesses are also part of our respond capability, and they have plans and they know exactly what they need to do in an event. Because normally we tend to look at it as this is a cyber issue, but the reality is cyber is actually a business issue, and it needs a business solution.
Wow.
Of which the cyber team is just part of that puzzle.
Give me an example of that. That's really interesting.
So I'll give UC, because we do run tabletop exercises. So it's important for us. We do tabletop exercises just to see if we are well positioned to respond, and every company should be doing it because you're testing where you've got weaknesses, right? So if I can give an example, let's say if we had an instance where we might have a phishing email that maybe comes through to one of our staff members, and that staff member happens to work for a faculty which might be doing some research. So understanding that the event, which is the phishing email, the event, if we look at it in isolation, we'll just say, oh, we've got phishing happening, let's contain it. But if it has been a successful phish, we actually have to understand what is the impact of that phish. What were they asking for? Did they download malware? If they downloaded malware, right, we now have to start thinking about the linkages to the business to say, okay, this person, what else do they do within the organization? What other systems do they have access to? So those are the vectors that malware could potentially travel, right? So understanding those linkages is really important. And from a business perspective, we need to be really clear about, if I am doing whatever work I do, I need to understand, where am I keeping my data? What systems do I use? Traditionally, people don't know, some people don't even know the systems they're using, but it's actually good information to know, because you can give good, relevant information when you're actually in that respond capability. And if you can respond quicker, it means the blast radius is also smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like, it's almost to me like the whole shift in health and safety, where health and safety has well and truly stepped away from just compliance to looking at it as a strategic function within the organization that looks at employee engagement, well-being, so much more than that. It sounds like cybersecurity is well and truly on that road as well.
It is, because if I actually think about it, you find that we look at the systems as a component. We need to secure our systems. We look at our business processes. We have to secure our business processes. We also think about our human resource capability. We have to make sure that we are securing that as well. So it becomes an enterprise-wide issue. And if I look at New Zealand, we are very, we trust first as a society. I know many times that I've actually gone for a job and they haven't asked for my qualifications. They haven't done any checks on me as a person. But the threat we now have is insider risk. Because, we are building our defenses. But what do I do if I'm a threat actor or if I'm a nation-sponsored actor, right? I have to get my people into your organization. They have the access they need, and we can get as much information as we want. So we have to start thinking about areas where they were not of much risk some time back, but now they are, because of the shift in the cyber landscape.
Well, tell us about that. So tell us a little bit about, what are these new trends that we're seeing and the types of cybersecurity risks that are out there?
So the new trends that we are seeing are trends that are leveraging technology. And it's always an interesting fact that the attackers are always ahead of the defenders. And attackers collaborate exceptionally well. We've just started collaborating as sectors, as industries. So some of the trends we are seeing is we are seeing deepfake videos. I mean, they use a company lost $25 million.
Wow.
Out of a deepfake video of the CFO giving a presentation and advising that payment had to be made. So this is the lens that people are going to. Wow. It's no longer just a phishing email. I will have something that's really convincing. So you find that we are starting to see how technology, when used for bad, can actually result in some really dire consequences for organizations. So we've seen a shift as well with a lot of ready-made exploit packs. So now you don't need to be a geek. You just need to be somebody with access to technology. Some of the actors are mass producing exploit kits. You just need to purchase and off you go. And you don't even need to understand anything. And we've also seen instances where, artificial intelligence, generative AI has been used to build exploit kits. I know that there's now work happening to make sure that, you cannot use generative AI for services like that. But I'm sure what we'll start seeing is we are going to start seeing specific generative AI platforms designed to create exploits.
Wow. How do we respond to that as an organization? I know you mentioned at the beginning of our talk that we really have to kind of accept that these are coming. So how do we respond to that? But also, I mean, is there a level of then upskilling and employee engagement that there needs to happen at a much broader scale because of these risks?
Yes, definitely. We now talk about security culture and behavior awareness, because it's no longer about learning, it's actually about changing our behaviors so that we start thinking about security as something that we do in our day-to-day life. I would always like to give an example of, for us, when we're crossing a road, we always check left, right. It's something that has been taught to us ever since we're young. So we just do it. You don't think about it. We now need to shift to get to that point where when you open your laptop, you think about being secure and it's ingrained in you. So yes, we definitely need to have a lot of training programs, upskilling, because I think traditionally we've done compliance training.
Yeah.
So there's an expectation that you need to do the annual training. That is a compliance requirement. Whilst it's still important, because to get cyber insurance, you need to show that you're training your staff. But I think shifting that and actually doing more engaging activities, workshop, having the conversations, making sure it's really clear why we need to do this, and making it relevant to the job that you're doing. So we are starting to shift our focus. We've done the general awareness training, but now we are shifting our focus, actually doing targeted training, looking at, okay, you're a software developer, how do we train you so that you securely develop your code? We are working with our finance team. A finance team, how do we train you so that you operate securely within your financial processes? And this is the shift that most businesses will need to start to make.
So it's totally that focus to behavioral change, but we know that behavioral change needs two things. Motivation is the first one. So are we motivated enough to change our behavior? But then also the correct infrastructure for that change to happen and for that change to be sustained.
Yes.
What does that look like in an organization that has a bunch of legacy systems? They've been doing things one way. You have employees who've been around for decades. And how do we build that change, and how do we create urgency around that change in the organization?
I think the reality is there is always a point in time where evolution happens. And for me, I call this era we are in digital evolution. Really, right? And I haven't used revolution, rather I've used evolution, because we are seeing things that we didn't think possible happening, right? So what it means is for some of the systems that we have, for us to remain competitive, we actually have to stop using those systems. We have to actually embrace the new so that we can move forward. It's a challenging position, especially if you're an organization that's 150 years old, right? But I think one of the things that we have to think about is we are guided by our past, right? But we are focused on the future.
Right.
And it's something that we were talking about last year.
That's right.
So I think the focus to the future is what we need. And actually acknowledging that for us to keep doing the same things, we can't afford to do that. As an organization, we can't. Yeah. As an organization that has competitors, we can't as well. Because if we are going to compete, we actually have to make sure that we've got platforms that are easy to use. We have platforms that our users can interact with easily. And we are also addressing the needs of this generation that's actually coming into our university. So I think for some of our business processes, I think we have to actually look at optimizing those business processes and then leveraging technology to make sure that they are more efficient. So technology is not going to optimize your process for you. You still have to do the optimization, and then you layer the tool on top so that it's more efficient.
I love that. And what do you think? I mean, to me, the digital services team, the whole digital services team within the university is so forward-looking. We've really spent a lot of time investing in that. But do you think that kind of the average SME that's in New Zealand can afford investing as much time and energy into cybersecurity? And what would your recommendation be for those organizations that potentially don't have a formal infrastructure around this?
I think for the organizations that don't have a formal infrastructure, there are services available, and there are companies that are focused on providing services for small to medium enterprises. And what I would also encourage is, for most of the cloud applications or cloud services, if you can do your assessment right and make sure that they have the valid security certifications, you'll find that operating your services out of a secure cloud application saves you money.
Wow.
Rather than trying to build a service that you run and then you've got to secure. So for those SMEs, I would say really embrace using software as a service, because you are actually shifting the infrastructure cost, most of the security cost, to the SaaS platform provider, but you're still responsible for your data. So now you've got a small area that you need to focus on.
Right. Well, speaking of data, so we obviously have regulatory obligations around our data that's specific to students and staff members as well, but there are other organizations that have the same and potentially just as high regulatory obligations. Like, what does that regulatory landscape look like to us, and is it keeping up with where we need to be with cybersecurity? Is it enough? Do we need to, just make sure that we're kind of ticking those boxes? Or
I'm actually grateful for AI, really, because ticking the box for compliance is not enough. You actually have to make sure that you are doing what is right by your customers, by the people that are entrusting you with their data. And at the same time, if you actually want to unlock value out of that data, right, and you want to utilize most of the generative AI tooling that we're seeing, you actually have to do those basics right. So most organizations, even us as well, we actually have to make sure that the good things that most of the compliance requirements allude to, we are doing them. We need to make sure access is on a least privilege. We need to make sure that we are not keeping data that we don't need to keep. We should be archiving and destroying that information, so that when we are surfacing information, we are surfacing relevant information and we are not getting hallucinations, right? So compliance, yes, it's a good thing, but we actually need to think about the business value. We also need to start thinking as well about how can we leverage this data so that we can start unlocking value from some of the emerging technologies.
I love how you frame this whole function in the organization as an opportunity.
Oh, yes.
And not just as this is a risk we need to manage and kind of a headache that we need to get, just make sure that we're doing the bare minimum. But there's opportunity in here, isn't there?
There is opportunity, and as long as we focus on not ticking a checkbox, and we actually focus on, okay, what is the problem? What are we trying to achieve here? And with cybersecurity, like I said, right, it can be really costly to build all the controls you need. So you have to really look at it from a threat lens. What is the threat I'm protecting against, and what is the risk I'm trying to mitigate? And that control has to be commensurate to value, right? There's no need for me to spend $1 million trying to protect against a possibility that will cost me 100,000. Right? It doesn't make sense. Thinking about that benefit realization as well in the context of investment into cybersecurity for a business is really important.
But isn't there a lot of reputational risk in that approach as well, where you're like, look, we just physically cannot afford to protect against all these risks. We're going to kind of rank them and then just account for the best ones, but we actually knew that this is something that could happen, then it affects somebody. It affects one person, it doesn't affect 10,000 people, but maybe that person is just that unhappy that they take it to the media and they're very... How do you deal with that kind of reputational risk around a thing?
So that comes to, so when we look at cybersecurity, we always look at our compliance requirements, right? Like we're talking about. So if I take your example, there will be, that will align with privacy. We take privacy seriously. So we will make sure that we've got controls that ensure that for that information that has to comply with the privacy regulations, that is kept safe. That's really, really important.
Yeah.
So when you are ranking and making decisions, there are certain things that you know you've got to do, like compliance, privacy regulations, because, you know, our chief privacy commissioner, we don't get, the fines that we get in New Zealand are not as high as the fines in the rest of the OECD, because like in Australia, I think they've put up their fines really, they're quite high now, whereas in New Zealand we are sub 10,000.
But that's then going to change, right? That's going to change soon.
It is a matter of time. I'm sure with everything that is happening in the world, there is appetite, and the government is also making the indications that we actually have to be more cyber resilient.
So if you were a company that kind of has, let's go like a small, medium, and then large organization. So you essentially have nothing in place. You're almost a micro organization. What do you do because of these threats tomorrow? Let's go for those people first.
Okay, so if you're a small business organization, the first thing I would say is you need to know the data that you're collecting. Because if you know the data that you're collecting, then you can look at that data and go, do I have any compliance requirements? So if you're dealing with credit cards, you've got PCI, DSS requirements to meet, so then you've got to meet those. If you're collecting personal information, you've got to meet the privacy regulations. So understanding your data, number one. From understanding your data, you need to assess the risks that you've got. And then you have to understand the threats that your business might face. Because with understanding the threats and understanding your risk, you can prioritize the work that you need to do. And maybe sometimes it might be about just limiting the information you're collecting. You might not need to actually invest in controls. It might literally be saying, actually, why am I collecting a date of birth when I can just collect a year of birth? Right? So it makes you start to think about that data that you're collecting. So I would say if you do that and you understand your risk, then you have to look at doing the basics. If you're using digital systems, patch them. It doesn't cost you anything. You've got to patch them. As soon as you've got those patches, if you're using outdated systems, consider upgrading them so that you're not using outdated systems. So those are the key things. And if you've got login credentials, have MFA as well. So if you're a small business, I would say patching, having MFA, making sure you understand the data that you've got and you're protecting it accordingly, and as well as assessing for threats and risks before you make a plan.
Wow.
Yeah.
And if you're a medium to a large organization, what's that next year going to look like for you in this space?
So next year, I think for most people, is going to be around data management, because we know that with the plethora of tools that are out there which use generative AI, or most employees want to use them for productivity reasons.
Right.
So I think making sure you're ready to be able to utilize those technologies is what is really important. And it comes down to data, making sure you've secured your data, making sure that the people who have access to that information are supposed to have access to that information. So that's what one thing I would say is coming up for medium to small to large businesses. And I also think training employees as well is one of the big things that these organizations have to do, moving past compliance. I love just-in-time training. If you can train a user as and when they are doing an activity, that is more impactful, and they'll remember that.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Rudo. Thank you for your time. It's always lovely to have you, and we look forward to seeing your star rise more and more in the future. Watch the space, guys.
Thank you so much for having me.